This is Joni Mitchell, Canadian-American singer-songwriter. If you're looking for one of the best female singer-songwriters of all time, you came to the right place. Now this video will examine the life and music of Joni Mitchell. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to the life and music of Joni Mitchell. Roberta Joan Mitchell is a Canadian-American singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and painter. As one of the most influential singer-songwriters to emerge from the 1960s folk music circuit, Mitchell became known for her personal lyrics and unconventional compositions which grew to incorporate pop and jazz elements. She has received many accolades, including 11 Grammy Awards and induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1997. Rolling Stone called her one of the greatest songwriters ever, and AllMusic has stated Joni Mitchell may stand as the most important and influential female recording artist of the late 20th century. Mitchell began singing in small nightclubs in Saskatoon and throughout Western Canada before moving to the nightclubs of Toronto. She moved to the United States and began touring in 1965. Some of her original songs, Urge for Going, Chelsea Morning, Both Sides Now, and The Circle Game, were recorded by other folk artists, allowing her to sign with Reprise Records and record her debut album, Song to a Seagull, in 1968. Settling in Southern California, Mitchell helped define an era and a generation with popular songs like Big Yellow Taxi and Woodstock. Her 1971 album, Blue, is often cited as one of the greatest albums of all time. It was rated the 30th best album ever in Rolling Stone's 2003 list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, rising to number 3 in the 2020 edition. In year 2000, the New York Times chose Blue as one of the 25 albums that represented turning points and pinnacles in 20th century popular music. NPR ranked Blue number 1 on a 2017 list of greatest albums made by women. Mitchell began exploring more jazz-influenced ideas on 1974's Court and Spark, which featured the radio hits Help Me and Free Man in Paris, and became her best-selling album. Mitchell's vocal range began to shift from mezzo-soprano to that of a wide-ranging contralto around 1975. Her distinctive piano and open-tuned guitar compositions also grew more harmonically and rhythmically complex as she melded jazz with rock and roll, R&B, classical music, and non-Western beats. Starting in the mid-1970s, she began working with noted jazz musicians including Jaco Pastorius, Tom Scott, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, and Pat Metheny, as well as Charles Mingus, who asked her to collaborate on his final recordings. She later turned to pop and electronic music and engaged in political protest. She was awarded the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2002. Mitchell produced or co-produced most of her albums and designed most of her own album covers, describing herself as a painter derailed by circumstance. A critic of the music industry, she quit touring and released her 19th and last album of original songs in 2007. She would give occasional interviews and make appearances to speak on various causes over the next couple decades, though the rupture of a brain aneurysm in 2015 led to a long period of recovery and therapy. A series of retrospective compilations were released over the time period, culminating in the Joni Mitchell Archives, a project to publish much of the unreleased material from her long career. She returned to public appearances in 2021, accepting several awards in person, including a Kennedy Center honor. Mitchell returned to live performance with an unannounced show at the June 2022 Newport Folk Festival and has made several other appearances since, including headlining a show in 2023. On a personal note, I heard Joni's music as a youngster growing up in Canada because she was Canadian. She was from Saskatchewan. And there were a number of other great singer-songwriters that were pretty prominent on Canadian radio at the time. Dan Hill, Gordon Lightfoot, Neil Young, Gino Vanelli, Anne Murray, Ian Tyson, The Guess Who, Paul Anka. They were all very prominent singer-songwriters at the time, but there was something about Joni Mitchell that I really enjoyed, and I was not sure why. So in the 70s, I listened to the radio as much as I could, but it was the early 80s that I really found out why I enjoyed Joni Mitchell's music. I was in high school and I had signed up for a songwriting music course. And by the end of the semester, the goal was to write music. And one of the first assignments we had to do early in the semester was to pick a song or two that we really enjoyed, and we were going to break that song down and figure out why we really liked it. And the first song I picked that I was going to really analyze and break down was a song called Help Me by Joni Mitchell from the Court and Spark album that was out in 1974. This was the early 80s. I was going to analyze it. I had heard the song before, knew I liked it, said, okay, I'm going to pick that song. So in this music class, we had this music teacher that was unbelievable. Talked about the lead, talked about the chord structure, talked about the rhythms, and that's what I did with that song called Help Me. And the lyric subject matter was basically, I thought, mostly just a love song, but it wasn't until I started to break down the chord structure that I heard for the first time this chord called the major seventh chord. And it was an epiphany that I knew that when I heard major sevenths in chords, in music, I loved that chord, I loved that sound. And when I had that epiphany in that music class, for the next week, it didn't really matter. I listened to music, if I heard a major seventh chord, I was developing ears where I could hear what a major seventh chord sounded like. Well, that's not the end of the story, because I started to look at who were the musicians on that album and on that song, and it was the guitar part by Larry Carlton that blew me away. On keys was Joe Sample, but I also loved the horn arrangement on it because I was a trumpet player at the time. And there was also some flute in it, and I just loved her voice, the way she was just bouncing around octaves. It's just so easy and effortless. And it just, the way it all came together, but it was that epiphany of that major seventh chord that I fell in love with. Well, that's not the end of the story. The second song that I picked as my second most favorite song was a song by a singer-songwriter called Michael Franks from an album called Sleeping Gypsy, and the song was called Lady Wants to Know. And again, we broke down the song, the lyrics, the lead, the chords, the rhythms, and another epiphany. Those major seventh chords were all through that song by Michael Franks that I also fell in love with. But that's not the end of the story there. I looked at the musicians on the album cover, who was on that Michael Franks album with Lady Wants to Know, and it was again Larry Carlton, Joe Sample. So I thank Joni Mitchell for giving me the epiphany of knowing what a major seventh chord sounds like. I fell in love with it then, back in the early 80s. Still love music with that major seventh chord. And Help Me from Court and Spark, from Joni Mitchell. I want to say, Joni, love that tune. Thank you for giving me the ears to hear that chord, the major seventh chord. I hope you enjoyed the video on one of my favorite singer-songwriters, Joni Mitchell. If you've got an artist or band you'd like featured on this channel, pop it in the comment section. I'll make another video. Thanks for stopping by. Rock on.